proposition says there are reasons why people who are successful, who are champions, are not accountable. They're thought of as perfect. Any criticism is dismissed on the basis that people are just jealous, and to the extent the opposition talked about nationalism, they said that's another reason why these people are insulated from any criticism. The opposition says, well, those prongs are both not true. Firstly, you have an incentive not to be unaccountable because of your reputation. Having accumulated a reputation, you don't want to lose it. Now, the prompt response to many of these mechanistic critiques very vigorously, we all thought. They first say that there is a culture of fans adoring these individuals, which means that that kind of accountability never quite happens. There is no real cost to them. To the extent the opposition says they'll get called out, either by previous champions or the media, they talk about how previous champions are subject to the exact same noxious incentives, and so if anything, have an incentive not to call out other people when they are just as bad as everyone else. But there are still some open questions. The biggest open question about this clash is, to what extent does it actually matter? First, because by the proposition's own characterization, this narrative only possibly applies, or this freedom from accountability, can only possibly apply to a very, very small group of people, by their own characterization, not 99.9% of people, who are, in fact, unaccountable. The second question is, to what extent do we buy what happens in the third proposition, where there is a sudden broadening of the debate from the implicit context of athletes to figures such as Nelson Mandela and Aung San Suu Kyi? And is that mechanization robust enough that we buy that in that context huge impacts arise? The judges were not unanimous on this point either. Third clash, therefore, on motivation. What we hear coming from the opposition is that, well, you aren't motivated to fight hard if that piece of metal means nothing to you. You aren't motivated to fight hard unless you really believe you want to achieve the greatness of which you might be truly capable deep down. The prompt responds with vigorous mitigation. They say, but there's money to be got. You feel good from participating in the activity. Your family and friends will enjoy the fact that you are doing very well. So that seemed like fairly effective mitigation. Some open questions. Number one, how much of this point is actually mitigated? We buy there is mitigation, but how much, to what extent does this vanish the point coming from the opposition? Given that the opposition does characterize, and the proposition to some extent ride in this as well, that glorification is a particularly powerful incentive for people. The second question is, does this just make the debate symmetric? If the proposition says there are lots of reasons for people to still want to win, do all the harms about pressure and emotional damage and pushing yourself beyond your limits and cultivating a toxic competitive culture, are those in fact symmetric? Or do certain very specific things, like the terror of failure, like imposter syndrome, like being a generally unpleasant person at competitive events, are those things not quite symmetric? And does it matter that none of this was actually explicitly said by the opposition? So, because of that, we had a very good discussion. We converged quite rapidly, but not completely, towards a 7-2 call. And that 7-2 call was that the team which is runner-up in this year's final is the team. Oh, I'll announce the champion instead. I thought that seemed more intuitive too. Well, the World Schools Debating Champion 2024 on a 7-2 split is the team in proposition.
This year's WSDC 2024 champions, Team Scotland.